Just before I begin the video, which is about 20 minutes long, I'd like to say this. This is an important video to understand. It really is, because it really puts a coach and horses through the Ed Miliband world and net zero in relation to wind farms. So please try and watch it, and please try and share it. It would be very helpful to spread the message and spread the understanding this gives. I've done a lot of research on this particular one, and I've listed a number of papers here below in the description below this video, and put them on Substack, etc. So please watch. It is important. Here we go. Today we have lots of politicians who for years have been telling us men are women and women are men. For years they've been telling us all sorts of things that are scientifically untrue. And one of the things they've been going on about is wind energy, offshore wind energy, being 9 times cheaper. 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels like gas. Gas is much cheaper and always has been, except for a very, very short period of just over 1 year. And I'm just going to expose you to some really stupid people. So here they are.
The cost of solar and wind energy is 9 times cheaper than imported fossil fuels.
I'll say it again.
Clean British power is cheaper than imported fossil fuels.
Offshore wind is now the cheapest form of electricity in its country.
It is cheaper to save the planet than it is to destroy it.
Well, that absurd claim is one good reason never to trust Carbon Brief. Yeah, 9 times cheaper. I mean, how ridiculous do you get? Or saying things like this.
We are at the moment at the mercy of the roller coaster of fossil fuel markets. Gas prices, wherever we get the gas from, subject to the decisions of petrostates and dictators. And your viewers are seeing it in their energy bills, have been seeing it for years, particularly since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It's time to actually have homegrown, clean energy that we can control. That is what our plan is all about. It's the right thing for the country, for bills, for security.
Yeah, it's going to get cheaper in the long term, as it were. We're having to pay the penalty now. And I'd like to just dispel all that nonsense now. Renewables are much more expensive than gas. And so what I did was I worked with Grok, a great tool, but always starts off with a woke, wrong set of figures for me, and I have to work it through. And I had to do 2 things. One is I had to establish what the price of gas would have been since 2000 without any renewables in it. Now, I know we've already come up from the Renewable Energy Foundation with a figure of a £220 billion saving, and I'll link to that paper below this video because it's essential. That's a saving if we'd not had renewables. We today, in the last 25 years, would be 220 billion better off. Yeah? So that's that. But I did my own research recently, and the first one was to establish the price of gas as it would have been for each year since then, without the effect of renewables in. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, renewables have distorted the price of gas. Renewables have added taxes and levies to gas, carbon costs and all sorts of things. Now, some of the years they didn't do that in that period, and other years they did. So what I've done is construct in this first paper, and I'll post the full paper below, is trying to get to the price of what gas would have been for these years without all renewable nonsense. And I've expressed it in prices per kilowatt hour for the consumer. So you can see today what the price would have been. And here's that resulting table. Now, this is only part of the table. The full table is in a paper below this video. You can read the whole paper and how the figures were arrived at. But basically, you've got the average price for a year of the raw gas in its form, that's in a therm. And then you've got the price, that's in pence per therm, by the way. And to give you some idea, 1 therm is over 29 kilowatt hours, so it's quite a lot. And then you've got the cost coming out from the distributor, and the cost from the distributor to the consumer, what you're paying. And those are the figures, and that's how they've changed. Again, you can see the proper full paper instead of me piecing bits together like this in the paper below this video. But there's nothing like a picture to explain things. So this is what the gas price would have been without renewables, without carbon taxes, without the effect of renewables on the gas price, because they distort it, putting it into second place. So it has to be in standby, etc., etc. And that's what the paper takes into account. And as you can see, it was pretty cheap. And by the way, these are all adjusted to 24 prices in this particular one here. So they're all on the same price basis. And you see there has been a gradual increase and a decrease around about 2013-14. And then this big sharp spike. Now the big sharp spike was because of the Ukraine crisis. Everyone knows about it. And then it dropped like a rocket, and it's now a bit higher than it was before the Ukraine crisis. But these prices are nothing like what we're paying now. These prices are in the region of, to the consumer, without the 5% tax on top, they're around about 11 pence per kilowatt hour, not 30. So these are roughly about a third of the price, but they are still dropping. I'll explain that soon. So we'd be much better off without the renewables, but we already know that. So let's now do the second part of my study, another paper, where I calculated the cost of wind. But this time the wind had to pay for the trouble it caused. So it had to pay, obviously, for its own price, its own what we call contracts with a different fixed price, because wind and solar are on fixed prices. They're not changed by the gas price that day. That's a myth. They are on fixed prices called the contracts with a difference price. But in addition, the wind has to pay for the waste of power and the money for a gas plant to be waiting in standby, maybe wasting up to 50% of the gas, and so on. It's also got network costs, the huge extra network costs the grid are having to put in to come alongside the existing energy system, in effect. So I've taken all these into account in the paper below. That's the second of my papers below, and that gives us a wind price. A wind price for, well, we've taken, instead of the beginning of the century, we've taken it since 2010. So I've taken the last 15 years, right? And this is the result of the wind price compared to the gas price for the same period. So the gas price has all these influences removed. It's a paradise world as if we hadn't had renewables. And the wind price is what the price you're paying coming from wind, but allowing for all the costs that wind incurs as a result of its intermittency, etc. Now the blue line is the wind price, and the green line is the gas price, the perfect world gas price without renewables that we could have had. And you can see that the wind price is way higher when you allow for all the extra costs. Way, way higher, until we get to the Ukraine crisis here. And that's when the gas price really shot up because of the disruptions from that. And it shot up for just over a year there in total, and then returned. And it's still now below the cost of the wind. But there's a sting in the tail here. There's more of a story in the tail. So those are the two papers combined that I've done. So a point I want to make now is if you take the area when gas was actually more expensive, it's the area here, the Ukraine crisis, and compare it to the area here when all that time the wind has been far more expensive as it is now, you can see the huge discrepancy in the amount here. And it's why we have wasted, since the turn of the century, around about 220 billion in doing this. Now Miliband has used this as a total excuse, this bump, to hide behind, saying we can't be subject to this fossil fuel price fluctuation. But look here, look at the history of that green line, the gas line. It's been remarkably stable until the Ukraine crisis, and those things can occur every few decades, every so often. But today has been announced a reduction in the UK energy price cap, the first reduction so far. Why? Well, not because of wind, because those costs are shooting up, as you'll see, but because gas and oil prices have lowered. You could call it the Donald Trump benefit, the benefit everyone's getting now in the world from low oil and gas prices. And so it's the oil and gas prices now that are actually making wind relatively more and more expensive as oil and gas prices return to the pre-Ukraine levels, because the pigeons have come home to roost for the wind farm industry. I'm now coming to the key part of this video. It's really important you understand this, because once you do, you'll appreciate just what's going on in the wind industry and how absurd it is. The contract for the difference price is simply the fixed price paid to solar or wind farms from the government. It goes out to auction, they agree a price, and that's fixed for the length of the contract, but it's index linked to the consumer price index. So you can see in the past, the prices are extremely high when offshore wind here, this is offshore wind we're looking at, offshore wind was, how can you put it, experimental maybe. So they paid a very high price. But the high price, by the way, which is almost £200 a megawatt hour today, stays until the mid-2030s, because these are quite long contracts. And what happened after that was the next auction got a much lower price for offshore wind, as you can see here, and then a lower price again. And this was at a time, of course, when everyone thought wind was going to get cheaper and cheaper, and the investors didn't really understand the technology. So just like a bull market, they all rushed to get the contracts, and this kept the price low. But it was at this point that reality started to come in. You see, the wind farm financial model is to develop the wind farm and then sell it on to pension funds, green investment things, and so on. They don't keep it because it costs billions to develop. They want to take the money, take the profit, and move on to the next one. However, in 2021, Professor Howard Hughes dropped this paper on the industry, and what it showed was quite staggering. Something that hadn't applied before with the smaller turbines below 2 megawatts. What it showed was with the larger megawatts, the operating and maintenance costs of them became so high that it limited their economic life to 12 to 15 years. I've written a paper that's in my Substack on the influence of Professor Hughes at this time, and the link to it is below this video. So now what happened is in round 5 of the auctions, they tried an even lower price. After all, wind's getting cheaper. But oh no, no one bid. Not a single bid. The price was too low. The entire base was now shaky. The entire future of wind energy was at risk. They couldn't tolerate anything like this price. So Ed Miliband, using other people's money, our money, simply put the price up. And there it is. In round 6, the actual price they got had to be substantially increased to get anyone to take any interest at all. But the story does not even end there, because even with this high price, Ørsted, who successfully won the bid for Hornsea 4, pulled out. They pulled out because it's uneconomic to carry on even at that high price. And they're willing to pay an estimated £451 million to as much as £618 million in total pull-out costs. So they're willing to pay more than £500 million to pull out of a deal that's already a very high price. So it's no longer a bull market, it's a bear market, and a very confused one at that. The customers have gone. But if that's the case, the profitability of all these companies, all these wind farm companies, would plummet, wouldn't it? Because they haven't got the customers. This big investment bubble has actually burst. So there we are. What I'm trying to explain is really the offshore wind industry is at the end of the road. They've also pulled out of a big Dutch development as well, and simply said we can't do it without big subsidies. And that is the case. There's no real future I can see for it, but then why would you believe me? Why would you believe Paul Burgess's analysis of this situation? Well, if I was telling the truth, the profitability, because of the lack of customers now, realise how the bubbles burst to realise the length of life of these things is not sufficient to get your money back, there would be no customers. And so the wind farm industry would have a dying customer base, and the profits then forecast would be bad, wouldn't it? It really would be bad. And if profits are bad in any company, the forecast or what you expect, the expectancy of profits, the share prices would drop, wouldn't they? So you don't have to believe me. Just look at the drop in share prices of these 10 wind energy companies. Well, heading the list is a 98% drop in the share price of TPI Composites. Then Vestas Wind Systems, they make the turbines. 92.1% drop. Now, this next one is interesting because it's not European, it's a Chinese one. And the Chinese one there has a 82.3% drop. They make turbines. So they're one of the major suppliers. And then we come to the biggest wind farm company of them all, Ørsted, a Danish company. And that's had an 81.4% drop. Onto the others now, you can see them. I'll just go down the list of percentages. 72.3%, 68.8%, 59.8%, 52.6%, 43.4% and 40%. Well, there we are. That's an industry in collapse. That's an industry where the profitability forecasts are so bad that the share prices, which are a forecast of profitability for a company, above all, that's a most important marker, have collapsed. So it isn't just my opinion, is it? It isn't just Paul Burgess saying this is the case, yeah? And so let's return to the graph now and look just where we are now after round 6, because we have round 7 auction coming, and Ed Miliband has a problem. So how is he going to solve it? Well, being the good socialist he is, it's with more of other people's money is needed. It's as simple as that. We even pay more to keep the ideology going. It's like spinning plates that are all beginning to fall off the poles. It isn't working, but will he give in? No. Our politicians, and in particular this government, are like a gang of sheep. And just as this sheep is saying as they head towards the cliff edge, look, I have my misgivings too, but what choice do we have but to stay the course? And that is what this government is about, staying the course. They have just signed away our right to even control our carbon taxes, resulting in a 50% increase in carbon taxes now throughout our economy, as well as a brand new tax, carbon tax, coming on top of all your diesel and petrol taxes. Unbelievable. So there we are, we're heading for hugely expensive electricity. I mean, we're going to go back to the ridiculous levels of Hornsea 1, where we're now paying £198 in today's money, by the way, for the power from that, which is, you know, about 4 times the price we should be paying. And that is a contract that goes on to the 2030s. So this is totally bonkers. It's total madness. But the myth of cheap energy, you can see how that bubble, you know, grew. You can see how it grew and the prices dropped and then they turned, and now they're on the way up. And they're also on the way up for onshore wind. And here's the graph for onshore. I won't go into detail. It has the same problems, just slightly less in the amount, if you like, but the same short life problems. In the end, it's going to end up a disaster. And we're going to end up with the North Sea covered in rusty spikes and, you know, huge foundations. And we're going to end up with nice hills covered in Wales, for example, with huge concrete foundations. In a little village I was just visited in Wales, in the middle of Wales, they're putting up wind turbines 200 metres high, which is 45 metres higher than Blackpool Tower, you know, in the hills, and all the roads and all the tens of thousands of tons of concrete are going into it. And they're telling me it's a 40-year life. This 40-year life, or even 25-year life, is a bit like Fools and Horses with Trigger and his broom. He looked after his broom and it looked after him, sort of thing. He's had this broom for 25 years. It's only had 9 handles and 15 heads. That sort of argument. It's exactly the same as the wind industry. It's all over. The only question is how much damage now it's going to be done on the way to its total destruction, its total end, it being seen as a huge mistake. And unfortunately, we've got Ed Miliband, who's totally ideologue on this, leading it. And that's why I predict he's got to go, because the practicality of this, well, it's just not possible. Net zero is not possible, and we don't need it anyway. Thank you very much for watching.